Good afternoon. Welcome to track 5 of the eLearning Forum Asia 2020. In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to share with you some research that we learned about game-based learning and higher education and the relationship between game flow, learning strategies on a digital board game. This is Kelvin Chen from the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Let's look at what we have today. Everyone in this 21st century e-learning era is interested or rather enthusiastic about using game in learning because we need to motivate our learners to be more interested in their learning process. And we believe that so we are running a series of game-based learning artifacts as well as doing some research and evaluation to find out how and why learners will benefit from game-based learning. So how do we come by assessing the extent to which game-based learning is working for us? We are employing quasi-experimental design to understand and test whether game-based learning is better than using conventional learning approaches. And we do so by assessing various learning outcomes as well as self-reported attributes that are related to gamified learning itself. And one of them has been very interesting topic of flow. Flow has a long history in psychology. It is used for understanding how we assimilate ourselves into the natural environment or into the event that we are engaged in. Putting that in the gaming and the gamified and the game-based learning context, we can make use of flow for understanding how concentrated, how engaged we are when we are dealing with game-based learning artifacts, such as having adequate skills with challenging situations that raises our arousal. Okay. So we believe that learners might spend more time in flow that lead to better performance. We are also aware that a flow might have something to do with our general learning experience in terms of improving intrinsic motivation, eliciting enjoyment and happiness, facilitating mastery and creativity. So in understanding game-based learning and flow, we are interested in understanding to what extent motivational affordance will affect on the learning process as well as the learning outcome. But the flow concept itself is rather abstract. So researchers, particularly those in the education research in psychology, have came up with effort of adopting the flow theory into more concrete operational definitions and constructs for understanding how flow can be measured in a game or game-based learning. Okay. So here we have the e-game flow framework modeled after the flow theory, offer several attributes about key learning experience arising from game-based learning. And they include concentration, goal clarity, feedback, challenge, autonomy, immersion, and two more domains that we are not covering in this study, which would be social interaction and knowledge improvement. So it is easy to oversimplify that a game is doing students good in their learning because they got hyped up, but this is not enough and it's not specific enough. So what are the better ways of understanding how game or game-based learning can affect on learners? So these are the constructs that are attempts to understand how game could enhance or facilitate learning, such as concentration, In the game environment, learners are more likely to focus on the task. Challenge, they got more interested because the skills math challenge both exceed a certain threshold will get them excited. Okay. Sometimes achievement in games will allow learners to gain a sense of control over their actions. Game-based learning also provides an end goal for learners to set their learning strategies with clear goals. And in the game-based learning settings, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. So those are immediate feedback crucial for learners to move on and get better. Last but not the least, we also have immersion, that are deep, effortless involvement with reduced concern for self and sense of time, so they got sucked into the game and forget about everything else. I believe that has something to do with an increased sense of attention as well. So in this study, we want to understand to what extent if we learn something about how game affects our learning, and that is related to how we strategically learn something in the form of self-regulated learning, how would that affect on learning performance? So the first hypothesis would refer to how learning performance in game-based learning can be regressed on SRL construct. And the second hypothesis, we wish to address concerns with how game-based learning could be regressed on game flow experience domains. So we have 64 undergraduate students recruited in this observational studies who got to play 6 online educational board games about introduction to psychology. And at the end of the day, they are obliged to complete an online survey as well as do an assessment on the learning module about, specifically learning about motivation. So these students they participate in this research after the midterm exam, and then they play the board games in a laboratory setting with the assessment afterwards, and they complete the online questionnaire before the end of the semester. The games actually look like this. It's rather interesting. We have several different types of games. Some are matching, some are puzzles, some are more action-like, but mostly they are primarily board games. Okay. So the entire session, including getting the informed consent, running the games, or doing the revision, and then doing the test afterwards and filling up the questionnaire, takes up about 60 minutes in total. The measurements that we use for understanding the attributes towards improved learning performance are game flow experience as measured by the e-game flow scale. And that was developed and based on a gaming model for evaluating players' game flow experience with a 7-point Likert scale. So we cover the e-game flow constructs already. So I'm gonna be brief right here. For understanding self-regulated learning, we have adopted an abridged 28-item motivated strategies learning questionnaire by Liu in 2012. That was based on the original Pinterest MSLQ, also with a 7-point Likert scale, and measuring abridged SRL domains, including learning strategies, self-efficacy, intrinsic value, anxiety, and lack of learning strategies. So for the data analysis, we have the response variable in the learning performance, which was assessed with a content test score from multiple choice items. We have 15 multiple choice questions for learning about how well they learn motivation at the introductory level psychology as prescribed in this lab session. And we perform a multiple regression model with backward selection to arrive at an optimal model for predicting learning performance in test score with the e-game flow dimensions as well as the strategies choice SRL. All analyses were run on the IBM SPSS 26 software. So here we have the 64 participants who were involved in either individual game playing or group game playing. And so here we have the results. At the end of the day, we arrive at a stable model that included the lack of learning strategy. The lower it is, means it's better. So in other words, students with better learning strategy or less clueless, they find themselves at better odds of doing well on the exit tests. And so do other game flow constructs, including concentration, feedback, immersion, and knowledge management. So the overall model, in fact, demonstrated a moderate fit of the data with an R-square at around 0.28. And out of the significant predictor variables, we identified effective learning strategies, feedback, immersion, and valuing knowledge improvement from game-based learning. They were identified as key variable in this regression model in predicting gain from on learning performance in the game-based learning setting. So our results indeed suggest that learners tend to value game-based learning with the flow elements such as feedback, immersion, and knowledge improvement, okay, that correlates with their learning strategies and metacognitive outcomes. Yet, to our surprise, unlike other immersive or action or competitive games, the board games featured in this gamified learning settings did not improve learning performance via the conventional gamified learning elements such as concentration, challenge, and autonomy. Perhaps our games are less competitive and exciting, but nonetheless pleasant enough to arouse our learners. So findings from our current studies in general can inform game-based learning designers towards optimizing not only the learning experience, but also the learning outcomes derived from game-based learning. And we would like to conclude that while competitive game-based learning can arouse immersive and challenging experience for learners, more subtle game-based learning such as puzzles and board games are equally potent in enhancing learning through feedback and immersion in the game-based learning context. I hope you enjoy the presentation.